Hi guys, thanks for checking out this video. So in my last video I was talking about Charlie Kirk and I was explaining reasons why so many people consider him to be fascistic, and then I got a lot of feedback on that and I realized I need to make another video and continue to clarify fascism and what it is for people. And I think it's worth doing because semantics matter, and this whole culture war and stuff that's going on is based on words and people misusing them and stuff like that. So I think this is definitely worth doing. And I sympathize with a lot of you who are confused, because I used to be very confused about a lot of this stuff when I started this channel. That's why I keep a lot of the videos on here. When I started this channel like 8 or 9 years ago, after being at that Jordan Peterson rally and that video that went viral of him confronting those SJWs, like during all that, I got really confused by a bunch of propaganda on YouTube and stuff like that. And there's even, left-wing blogs there are articles about what a douchebag I am, and some of them are like they have screenshots of me talking about things, that show that I was confused about stuff. So I understand that, and I've also been targeted by Antifa and stuff, so I have a lot of personal experience with the left and Antifa. You should consider what I have to say here, because a lot of people bring up this idea that the left are throwing around the word fascist too much, and they're just using the word incorrectly, and it's making it lose all meaning and stuff like that. So I do want to clarify a few things. We should talk about Antifa, or like the left, and also like the Maga movement. And one of the commenters had also brought up the Canada First movement here in Canada, and recently in Canada there was a rally. I believe it was a Canada First rally, and a bunch of white people were like protesting immigration, and then a whole bunch of a bigger group of left-wing people showed up to protest them. And it was interesting, and people were asking me do you think these people are fascist? Because I used to go to a lot of sort of free speech rallies or culture war events, and I would usually be on the right-wing side, kind of filming things because the whole thing was kind of framed as Antifa is going to show up and try to shut this down, and I want to see what these people are actually all about and stuff like that. And I was much more defensive of the right back, in my early 30s, because I was having problems with Antifa, and I really did perceive them as being goons and thugs, and they would always call me a fascist. And at the time, I was actually started off pretty far left. I just had some mildly conservative views back then, and then that got me labeled a fascist and stuff. So I was like, these people are toxic and stupid, which they all are. So I want to address all that and clarify a bunch of things quickly and concisely. So hear me out on this. And the commenter also, I was talking about fascism being a form of political narcissism. And he was saying, are Antifa narcissists? And how do I know I'm not a narcissist? And I'm doing this video in a certain order. I want to actually talk about narcissism broadly more, and how it affects culture and Christian morality and stuff like that in the next video. But I think this video needs just to come first, so to clear this stuff up. Yes, there's a lot of narcissism on the left, and Antifa, a lot of those people that are involved in Antifa are narcissists, for sure. They're not fascists. The MAGA movement is a fascistic movement, for sure, and I'll clarify that in a minute why. As for myself, how do I know that I'm not a narcissist? The way the question was phrased is you're asking me, how do I personally know that I'm not one? There's a bunch of ways. One, most narcissists, a lot of them, unless they're doing covert stuff, will just tell you, they're happy to brag about it. But what you're asking me how I know, because intuitively when I self-reflect, I know that I have empathy, I have a coherent inner monologue, and I don't have any of the personality traits that go along with malignant narcissism. I'm, arrogant in a few specific ways that I'm self-aware about, and we can discuss why. But that's, that arrogance is not malignant narcissism. It's a completely different thing. I'm not a manipulator. I'm not dishonest. I'm actually, honest to a fault, basically. I'm a terrible careerist. I'm not a grifter, because I don't tell people what they want to hear. I just tell people what I believe. And a bunch of other ways. Mostly it's the fact that I have a coherent inner monologue, sense of self, self-reflect a lot, and am deeply empathetic. That's how I know I'm not a narcissist. But I'll get more into what neurologically even malignant narcissism is in another video. But it does apply to this because, yes, people were asking me, do I think the Trump movement is fascistic? And they were debating whether or not Charlie Kirk was. So I just want to very quickly again go over some, list off some stuff and say that I think that, Antifa are not fascists. You can criticize them objectively in a bunch of ways, and you can just call them hypocrites, or, thugs, authoritarians, or people who are looking for violence. You can use different words. They don't qualify as fascists, though. And so if you're on the right and criticizing people incorrectly using the word, you yourself should not throw it around so loosely. You can call Antifa other things pejoratively, but they don't qualify as fascism, because being about censorship or arbitrarily going around and labeling people stuff, that alone isn't fascism. Fascism started in Europe. You should read the text I pointed out last time. Oswald Mosley, Hitler's, obviously read Mein Kampf, Mussolini, and other third position stuff if you want, but stick to the European stuff. Fascist movements, it's a phenomenon, right? And once you kind of become familiar with it, you'll understand why the Trump movement obviously is fascistic. Fascistic movements always have a strong man leader. It's always a male, usually a male. I don't know, Margaret Thatcher might actually count. Anyway, but when you think about Trump, you can think of Hitler and Mussolini. There's a type of strongman male leader with a malignant narcissist personality. The government, it shows up when when capitalism is kind of reaching its final form, but the empire is also declining. So they need to scapegoat people, and the government starts to merge with corporations. In Trump's first term, he was mostly about setting up tax breaks for the rich, and in his second term, it's about extending those. And when he was sworn into office, standing behind him were like Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, all the richest titans of industry, right? It's because there's clearly a merger going on here. And then he put Elon Musk, a private citizen, in charge of Doge and gutting the federal government of government workers. So you have this malignant male narcissistic leader that has become in charge of America. He's merging the private sectors with government, basically. It's based on a hyper-nationalistic movement that definitely dog whistles to race. At its core, it's a religious movement about trying to keep a white status quo going, and it's showing up as American imperialism is fading. That's when these fascistic movements arise. It definitely appeals to a fictitious, glorious past, the same way Hitler was all about, and Mussolini were all about Rome and a great Germanic past. Make America great again is the exact same tactic. America was never great. You can argue that the middle class boomed and thrived after World War II because Britain handed the torch over after the events of World War II to give America this sort of inflated middle class in a game of capitalism, which is a natural system that doesn't last forever. But anyway, it wasn't, America historically was not great for slaves or poor people or most people in general, and itself, it wasn't a superpower until after World War II, and it used mostly by taxing Henry Ford with a wealth tax to get all that money to build stuff up. By saying "Make America Great Again," that is definitely marketing and psychological tactics to inflate the minds of people who know that their country is declining, and it's just really obvious. And intolerance of mockery, that's another. And Goebbels, pardon me, I have a hard time saying his name. Goebbels was openly said, we will not tolerate mockery, we don't tolerate being mocked. This is what we're seeing now with firing late night hosts, which I never thought those shows were funny. I don't watch them. Probably everybody feels the same way I do about those shows just being generally unfunny. I'd never paid attention, like Colbert and Kimmel or these guys or whatever. Haven't watched any of those shows in more than a decade, but I also don't think that they should be fired specifically just for mocking the Trump administration or for political reasons like that. My favorite comedian of all time is probably Norm Macdonald, or one of the top comedians of the time, Norm Macdonald. He got fired from Saturday Night Live for, I forget which issue was more troublesome, making fun of Jewish people or making fun of O.J. Simpson. But either way, him getting canned, it was just, that sucked. And I don't think that today any comedians should be getting fired specifically because of a political reason like that. If the ratings are low and it's just a private sector thing or something else, I can understand the reasoning. But something that's clearly political like that, that's troublesome. Biggest issue is scapegoating and an obvious economic problem onto a scapegoat. So Nazi Germany, they based a lot of their policies on inspiration from America, and a lot of the policies that America used for black people, the Nazis just took them and substituted the word Jew for black, and we're trying to use that for their population. So when there's an obvious economic problem because the whole system is flawed, the strongman leader that rises to power in this nationalistic sentiment will then scapegoat somebody. In this case, right now, you see ICE just beating the shit out of all these illegal immigrants. There might be a problem with illegal immigration, but most of those illegal immigrants are not criminals. They've been lured in to work for cheap labor in the system that exploits them. So they're definitely being scapegoated, very similar to the way Jews have been scapegoated in many, many ways throughout history. appears as the emperor's dying, highly authoritarian, protects the status quo, and there's a racial component to it. So like, if you're not clouded by some kind of crazy emotional bias and you're in any way objective, like you look at the MAGA movement, you look at Donald Trump, make America great again, and the behavior of the whole thing, and him hanging out with all these super rich people. This is definitely fascism. I don't know what else you would call it, and moving towards some kind of Christian theocracy type of fascism, American style, which is really just sort of a way to kind of like ultimately keep America as white as possible. So that's what that is. I think it's fair to say that anyone that's strongly supportive of the MAGA movement then qualifies as being fascistic, like Charlie Kirk, obviously very authoritarian. Because of the way he was killed, after he was killed by a young mentally ill white guy in America with a sniper rifle, guy from a Mormon background, a Mormon household. America has a problem because everyone's insane, because the culture's all fucked up, so they're all crazy, or they're on pharmaceutical drugs. First thing anyone should ask when there's like a mass shooter or anything like this is like, what drugs is the guy on, or wasn't he on? Not what was his political background, but the point that I'm trying to make with him is, in America you have a mentally ill white kid from a Mormon background shot Charlie Kirk, who was basically representing like fascistic views on these campuses when he was, bullying, like his 31-year-old, he's like rage baiting these kids so that he can film them and exploit them, right? The fact that he got killed in this way doesn't make him like a martyr of free speech or anything like that, or empathetic or anything. The other thing, if I should add, just as a side note about leaders, in our primate background, and if you study primatology or you look at like primates in the wild, chimpanzees, for example, have an alpha male. But it's the concept of an alpha male in nature like that is so different than what it was been like bastardized into our culture. Like, one of the defining traits of an alpha male in a primate colony is that he's emotionally intelligent and very empathetic, because one of his biggest roles is like mediating conflict between other members in a group. In modern America, being an alpha male is associated with having like no emotional intelligence, and this is also extremely problematic. Basically, these fascistic movements are a broad form of like malignant narcissism in the population, just manifesting politically. And these leaders that they manifest are malignant narcissists, which means that that's like a serious personality disorder. In my opinion, these people are basically crazy, and putting one in charge of everything is almost guaranteed to destroy your country in the end. Like, if you look at Germany and Italy, they lost World War II, and they were both like, Mussolini was dragged through the streets and hung. We don't know how Hitler died, supposedly by suicide, but like they went and picked a fight they couldn't win, and they're just delusional because they have this sort of alpha male thing, and they can't self-reflect honestly or back down, and they're full of hatred and blah blah blah. That all applies. When you look at Antifa or the left-wing people like in America, you can criticize left-wing violence, but it doesn't qualify as fascism. It's just, you have to call it what it is, like a form of left-wing violence. So you have to find other words for it, because it isn't fascism. They don't have a strongman leader. They're not all about mixing. In the culture war that went by in 2016 to 2020 or whatever, a lot of that is manufactured. And this is the other thing. Jordan Peterson had some grad students at U of T, Christine Brophy, I think, and I looked into their research, and they did research on like people that get really involved in like left-wing authoritarianism, which is like political correctness. And there's a mix. It's the same thing in. This is why I want to make another video separate about narcissism, because narcissists show up everywhere in religion and in both sides of politics and stuff to take advantage of like useful idiots, sheep. And with political correctness, what you had was basically a bunch of narcissists who are, this is through the data, and I can break down how they figured this out, or calculated this, I guess, concluded this. But with political correctness on the left, when it was all over the place, it was being ramped up by the internet and corporations and on TV and everything, and encouraging people. And then you had narcissists who were labeled PC authoritarians, taking advantage of PC egalitarians, who are another type of people who are basically dopey and useful idiots because they're easy to manipulate with empathy and like certain things like that. So yeah, there's a huge narcissist streak of opportunists and grifters on the left for sure. This is just part of primate politics. They're everywhere. So yeah, you can say there's a lot of narcissists on the left, and there's violent people on the left, and there's all kinds of toxicity as well. A lot of that stuff was hyped up by corporations to make an identity politics culture war instead of an actual class war, which is what my overall point with a lot of these videos is that people need to develop class consciousness, realize what's going on, because America is slipping into an oligarchy style fascism that is going to get worse, and they should recognize that. And these Canadians that were at that Canada First rally, this is my point why I really dislike those people in general. If you have the energy to literally go out and physically protest in the streets against immigrants, but you don't have the energy or the brain power to first go and criticize the system that lured them in, you're not punching up at the actual people that make the problem. You're just punching across the aisle at people, at the symptom of it, which are your economic competitors who don't hate you, that were brought here for cheap labor. So I despise people that like refuse to punch up and develop a broader consciousness, because it's just easier to be racist and like punch across. Like I can understand being, you know, how hard it is. I can't like to find, I don't have stable work despite like I don't have a criminal record or anything like that, and I'm able-bodied. But like it's just the economy has been fucked, and I can feel like how frustrating that is. That doesn't make me hate all these immigrants though necessarily. It depends on the environment and what's going on, right? But I do resent the system of exploitation that brought them here, basically to fuck over working class guys like me with slave labor. The whole thing is toxic. So what the fuck are these Canadian guys out there doing in the streets, bitching about immigrants instead of like getting mad and actually focusing on the system that fucked them? What the hell, you know? It's stupid. So anyway, I hope this clarified some more confusion around like fascism. What is it? Where is it? Is it on the right? Is it on the left? And do these left-wing groups qualify as fascist? Do these Canadian racist identity groups count? That's my answer for you guys. The MAGA movement is definitely fascistic. Hardcore MAGA supporters are basically fascist, yes. And on the left, you have all kinds of problems with violence and narcissism, but they're not fascists. So anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next video.